Are you ready to get started in rental real estate and you're trying to figure out what is your strategy to get things going? I'm glad that you're starting there. What's very important to remember is that whatever strategy you do choose is going to be a major player in the success of your own personal budget. So you always want to think about, yes, I want to move forward with my rental real estate, but how's this going to impact me actually as far as my personal budget goes? Yes, it is a major component, but most people look at rental real estate and they focus mainly on purchase price of the property. And then can I get enough rent to at least cover whatever mortgage I got on this property? Whatever I did for lending, can I at least cover my loan? And those certainly are very important, right? You want to be able to, at minimum, be able to cover your loan. But there are some other strategies or options therein that you get to choose that also tie directly to your personal financial budget or just your budget in general. One of those is going to be whether or not you go with a property that is newer or a property that's older. So the age of the property absolutely matters. That's going to determine just how volatile your maintenance budget is. So if you go with a new property, for instance, that certainly in most situations is going to be a more expensive property. But the idea that you're going to have any major repairs once your tenant gets in that property is it's probably not going to happen, or it's very minimal repairs, or you won't have repairs at all for a while. To be able to know that you don't really need to have too much of a budget for that, that could make some people feel more comfortable. Certainly, you want to run your numbers and see what trade off makes the most sense. But remember, you will likely be paying more upfront than you would if you went with a property that was older. Now, on the other side of that, you might not necessarily want to go with a property that's completely old and hasn't had any renovation. So you'll want to check on that. Now, certainly you are going to be able to get an inspection on the property, and that will help so that you can determine, do you even want to move forward with this property? Is the seller willing to do any of the maintenance themselves? Is it trustworthy? Those kinds of things. But certainly if you have an older property, you likely are going to want to put aside a bit more to accommodate any potential maintenance expenses that you might have. And you might see those type of maintenance expenses much earlier on than you would with a new property, as well as the cost of the particular maintenance expense. Like think HVAC systems, a new roof, those kinds of things could be pretty costly, but you want to certainly save towards those potential expenses every year, but have it in mind that if you are someone who's just starting out and perhaps you just aren't in a situation where you have that much money set aside in a savings account ready to be able to tackle in those kinds of expenses, you might want to get something that's a bit more turnkey, ready for you to maybe paint at most. If you know how to do plumbing or if you know how to fix a couple things on your own, put down some tile or flooring, whatever it's going to be, then great. But if you're going to have to hire for that, then maybe if you don't already have a team or know someone who can help you get it in the most affordable way, maybe you might be looking for something that's a bit more turnkey where you can just go in and paint maybe and change a couple doorknobs. Another thing to consider is just even the location of the property. Now, this is going to impact your budget from terms of vacancy rates, potentially. So, essentially, the vacancy is when it's not being rented. You don't have anybody in there. So, can your budget handle being able to cover the loan or any other expenses for the particular month when it's not rented? So, that's very important. So, you might not be looking for a place where vacancy rates are higher, any locations like that. Or you might want to be a bit more particular when it comes to making sure that you have the type of property, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, whatever mix have you in the particular area where you are looking to purchase a property that makes sense with regards to what the demand is for that particular area. So the demand is going to be very important. So you can make sure that you're offering something on the market that people actually want. And it's important to know if the rent in that area, I don't know if you go with a short term, mid term, long term rental, those kinds of things, but it's going to be important because those decisions even impact the consistency of the income that you receive. Sometimes people like the idea of a shorter term rental because you might be able to get much higher income from that. But there also might be seasonal. There might be times of the year where people just aren't attracted to that particular area. It just doesn't tend to rent out that much. So you would need to plan for all of those kinds of things in your budget, essentially. Another way that location of the property could impact your personal budget is when you think of the class of the properties. So let's just say if you're looking at a class A property, those are like your properties that are in very ideal neighborhoods, great school zones in terms of school ratings. The income of the people in that area is likely on the higher end, and you might have a much fewer vacancy rates, a much lower vacancy rate in that type of property. Your income in terms of the rent that you receive could be pretty stable, but you are going to pay more for that property likely. than you would for, let's say, a Class C property, where it might be less expensive, but the type of person or the level of income or rent that people are willing to spend in that particular area might be much lower. There could potentially be higher vacancy rates. I've also seen it where that's not necessarily the case. And then also it impacts your budget because you think in terms of those Class A properties will likely demand a certain type of flooring or paint or just the features, amenities, any of those kind of things that are offered, the way that you decide to do any renovations to your bathroom or kitchen or lack thereof can impact, especially with a Class A property. As opposed to maybe a Class C property is less costly. You still want it to be nice. You still want to provide something wonderful to renters, but you might not go in for your high end touches in terms of fixtures or appliances and those kinds of things. And so both of those things will impact the budget and are very important to consider. Another important strategy to consider is your cash flow strategy. So if you perhaps don't have a large income right now that would allow you to have quite a bit of money saved, or you don't have a huge savings that would allow for you to be able to get started in rental real estate, you certainly do want to be working on those to make sure your personal budget is fine. But assuming that you're there or you're preparing and you're moving past that point, what we start to think about is, well, what if I really need more income? One opportunity that you might take advantage of is house hacking. We talk about that all the time on our podcast and with clients. House hacking is certainly a strategy where you could potentially reduce how much you're spending every month on your own personal overhead, or you could at least leverage that. If it doesn't go about down by that much, you could at least leverage that so you can get maybe like a multi-unit property. So certainly you are going to spend more for a multi-unit property than you would for, let's say, a single family home, but you are going to be able to minimize certain other risks that could negatively impact your budget. For instance, a vacancy rate on a multi-unit. I mean, you're on the other side. The likelihood that you are going to pay your portion is much lower. And likely, if you are able to pay less by house hacking the property, having someone else help pay that mortgage or that loan back, then you'll be able to likely save more. So you're saving hopefully from the money that they're giving you that's over and above the amount required to pay back that loan, but also hopefully you're saving on your personal budget. So it's a savings accelerator, if you will. So the strategy overall, the strategy that you choose to go ahead and move forward with to get started in rental real estate is directly tied to your personal budget. Your budget overall, obviously, you need to have a budget for your rental business, but your personal budget does come into play. It dictates so much of that budget. So, all in all, you want to make sure that whatever strategy you're choosing is one that is going to be able to be sustainable and not put too much volatility in your own personal budget.